They called her the Veiled Widow of Wynther, though she had never been married. And on the night Duke Auren Leclair agreed to wed her, he made peace with the fact that he would never know love, only duty. What he didn't know was that beneath the veil, his bride was already plotting his destruction. Before the veil is lifted and the tale begins, friends, let's know in the comment below from what corner of the world you are watching this video from. We'll love to connect with you. Also subscribe to support this channel and follow each unfolding chapter of Secrets and Vengeance. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The entire hall had turned out to witness the Duke of Greythorn wed his ruined bride. Hundreds of nobles packed the vaulted cathedral at Brentford as twilight bled through stained glass windows, casting the stone floors in shades of crimson and gold. Commoners pressed against the outer gates, craning for a glimpse of what had become the scandal of the decade, the marriage that would unite two rival houses and end years of bloodshed. But it was not the peace treaty that drew them. It was the bride herself. The air hung thick with curiosity, sharp as incense smoke, and underneath it all, whispers. "I heard she's ghastly beneath that veil," a duchess murmured behind her ivory fan, her eyes bright with malice. Her companion leaned in, greedy for more. "They say her face was ruined in the fire that killed her father, scarred beyond recognition. Or cursed," someone else hissed from the pews. "The entire Wynther bloodline is cursed." "Poor Duke Auren," a lord sighed with false sympathy, shaking his head. "A war hero reduced to marrying that for the sake of politics." On the raised altar at the cathedral's heart stood Duke Auren Leclair, as still and unyielding as the marble saints carved into the pillars around him. He cut a severe figure in formal black, his shoulders broad from years of battle, his jaw set in a hard line. Dark eyes, unreadable as smoke, stared straight ahead. His face betrayed nothing, no nervousness, no pity, not even the faintest flicker of curiosity. The indifference was deliberate. It had to be. He had agreed to this union out of duty, not desire. The empire demanded peace. His house demanded an heir. What his bride looked like beneath that veil was irrelevant. Or so he told himself. From the shadowed alcove near the side entrance, the Duke's most trusted advisor, Lord Callum, watched with folded arms, his weathered face tight with concern. He had tried to dissuade Auren from this arrangement, but the Duke was as immovable as stone. Still, Callum couldn't shake the unease crawling up his spine. Something about this wedding felt wrong. The bride's strange request to hold the ceremony at dusk, the rumors that seemed too eager, too rehearsed, the way the Wynther servants had arrived days early and spoken to no one. The great doors at the cathedral's end swung open with a groan that echoed through the vaulted hall. Silence crashed over the crowd like a wave. Lady Isolde Wynther stepped into the aisle, and every eye turned to her. She moved with unsettling grace, her footsteps soundless against stone, as though she glided rather than walked. She wore ivory silk that shimmered like pearl in the candlelight, embroidered with silver thread that traced the shapes of winter roses, her family's crest. But it was the veil that held every gaze. Layer upon layer of thick lace, heavy as a shroud, completely obscuring her face. Not a hint of feature, not a glimpse of skin, only shadow. She reached the base of the altar, steps, and paused, spine straight, head high, waiting. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. Duke Auren finally moved. He descended the altar with measured steps, his boots ringing against stone, each echo deliberate, controlled. His expression remained locked in that same neutral mask. He had faced enemy blades without flinching. He had watched cities burn without blinking. Surely, he could face whatever lay beneath that veil. "Lady Isolde Wynther," he said when he reached her, his voice steady, formal. "Welcome to the House of Leclair. We are honored by this union." The veiled bride curtsied low, graceful despite the heavy silk and lace that draped her like armor. She said nothing. Duke Auren extended his hand. "May I?" A pause that stretched like eternity. Every noble in that cathedral leaned forward, shameless in their hunger to see, to know. Then her gloved hand, trembling only slightly, rested in his. "By the rites of this ceremony," the Duke continued, his voice carrying through the hall. "I am granted the privilege of the unveiling, of being the first to look upon my bride's face." His fingers found the edge of the veil. The cathedral held its breath. But the truth of that moment had begun long before the veil was lifted 3 days earlier, to be precise. Chapter 2, 3 days earlier. 3 days before the wedding, Duke Auren Leclair stood in his study at Greythorn Manor, staring at the ledger his advisor had just placed before him. "The Wynther estate controls half the grain routes to the southern provinces," Lord Callum said, his finger tracing the numbers. "Without their cooperation, the trade embargo continues. With it, we end a decade of starvation and strife." Auren's jaw tightened. "So I'm bartering myself for wheat and road access." "You're bartering yourself for peace, Your Grace." Callum's tone was gentle but firm. "The Empire needs this union. Your house needs this union." Auren turned away from the ledger, moving to the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. Beyond, the Greythorn estate stretched dark and sprawling beneath storm clouds. His father had built this legacy on blood and ambition. Now it fell to Auren to salvage it with a marriage he didn't want to, a woman he'd never met. "What do they say about her?" he asked quietly. "My bride." Callum hesitated. "Does it matter, Your Grace? Tell me." A sigh. "They say she's unfortunate, that the fire that killed her father left her disfigured, that she's hidden herself away for years, refusing visitors." Callum paused. "Some claim she's cursed." Auren's reflection in the rain-streaked window remained impassive. "Beauty fades. Alliances endure." The words tasted hollow, even as he spoke them. "There's something else." Callum pulled a sealed letter from his coat. "A message from Lady Wynther's household. She requests demands the ceremony be held at dusk, when faces are hardest to see," she wrote. Auren took the letter, studying the elegant script. The words were polite, formal, but underneath them, he sensed something else. Not shame, not timidity, control. "She dictates the terms of her own unveiling," he murmured. "Interesting. Your Grace?" "Nothing." Auren folded the letter and tucked it into his coat. "If the lady wishes to be married in shadow, who am I to refuse?" But even as he said it, suspicion coiled in his chest like smoke. 50 miles away, in the abandoned east wing of Wynther Hall, Lady Isolde sat alone in her chamber, a half-written letter trembling in her hands. "Dearest Mother, by the time you read this, I will have done what you begged me not to do. I know you wanted me to disappear, to take the name you gave me, and build a new life far from this cursed bloodline. But I cannot. Not while father's murderers walk free. Not while they wear their stolen honor like a crown. The Duke of Greythorn believes he is marrying a disfigured recluse, desperate for protection. Let him believe it. Let them all believe it. The veil is my armor now, Mother. It hides not my face, but my purpose. I am going to reclaim everything they took from us. Starting with the truth." Isolde set down her quill, her hand steady despite the fury burning in her chest. On the table beside her, the veil lay folded like a fallen shroud, layers of white lace that would hide her face from the world, from the man whose father had ordered her family destroyed. She could still see that night in her mind, sharp as broken glass. The flames, her father's study consumed by fire, the armed men bearing the Leclair crest, their swords slick with blood. She had been 17, hidden in the passage behind the bookshelf, her hand pressed over her mouth to stifle her screams as they cut down her father where he stood. "Burn it all," one of them had said. "Leave no witnesses. The Duke wants the Wynther line ended tonight." But they hadn't found her, and they never knew she had survived. For 7 years, Isolde had lived in exile under an assumed name, waiting, planning, and when the Empire demanded a marriage between Leclair and Wynther to secure peace, she had seen her chance. The distant Wynther cousins who inherited the estate were too eager for gold and status to question her claim. A few forged documents, a veil to hide her face, and suddenly she was Lady Isolde Wynther, the reclusive heiress no one had seen in years. The bride the Duke would never suspect. Isolde rose and moved to the mirror, candlelight flickering across her reflection. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the veil, and draped it over half her face. One side remained in shadow, obscured by lace. The other caught the light, her features sharp, her eyes cold as winter steel. Two faces, two truths, the monster they expected, and the ghost they had created. 3 days, she whispered to her reflection. 3 days, and I walk into the house that murdered my father. 3 days, and the Duke of Greythorn will lift my veil and see exactly what his family's sins have made. The candle guttered. Her reflection flickered between shadow and light, half hidden, half revealed, and wholly committed to revenge. Chapter 3. The formal meeting took place 2 nights before the wedding, in the drawing room of Greythorn Manor. Candles flickered in silver sconces, casting the room in amber light and deep shadow. Duke Auren stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. He had faced enemy generals across negotiating tables. He had stared down assassins in dark alleys. Surely he could manage a simple introduction to his future bride. The door opened. Lady Isolde Wynther entered like a ghost, her movements so quiet he almost didn't hear her footsteps. She wore dark green velvet that seemed to absorb the candlelight, and the veil, always that damned veil, obscured her face completely. A servant moved to announce her, but she waved him away with one gloved hand. "Your Grace," she said, her voice low and steady, not the trembling whisper he'd expected, not the broken plea of a desperate woman, just calm, controlled. Auren stepped forward, offering a slight bow. "Lady Wynther, I'm pleased you accepted my invitation. How could I refuse?" Beneath the veil, he thought he heard a hint of something amusement, irony? After all, we are to be bound for life in 3 days' time. It seemed prudent to meet at least once before then. He gestured to the chairs arranged near the fire. "Please, sit." She moved with unsettling grace, settling into the chair as though she belonged there, as though she had sat in drawing rooms like this 1,000 times before. Nothing about her suggested shame or timidity. Nothing about her said victim. It unnerved him more than he cared to admit. "I trust your journey from Wynther Hall was comfortable?" he asked, the words formal, expected. "Adequate." She tilted her head slightly, and though he couldn't see her eyes through the veil, he felt her gaze on him sharp, assessing. "Though, I confess, I found the accommodations here rather imposing. Greythorn Manor is quite the fortress, Your Grace. It was built to withstand sieges." "How fitting," she murmured. "And does it keep its enemies out? Or its secrets in?" The question landed like a blade between them. Auren's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I understand your meaning, my lady. Don't you?" Her voice remained soft, but something underneath it made his pulse quicken. "Every great house has its secrets, Your Grace. Surely Greythorn is no exception." Before he could respond, the door opened and 2 of his soldiers entered, carrying wine. Auren recognized them, Captain Gareth and his lieutenant, both veterans of the southern campaigns. Good men, loyal, but prone to barracks humor. As they set down the decanters, Gareth's eyes flicked to the veiled bride, and he exchanged a glance with his companion, a smirk, a barely suppressed laugh. "Something amusing, Captain?" Auren's voice cut through the room like ice. Gareth straightened immediately. "No, Your Grace. My apologies." "Then perhaps you'd care to share what you find so entertaining about Lady Wynther's presence." The color drained from Gareth's face. "I meant no disrespect." "Out!" Auren's tone left no room for argument. "Both of you, now." The soldiers fled, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. Silence settled over the room like frost. "You didn't have to do that," Isolde said quietly. "Yes," Auren replied, his voice harder than he intended. "I did." She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Why?" "Because you will be my Duchess, and no one insults House Leclair under my roof." "How noble." The words were almost mocking. "Tell me, Your Grace, do you always defend things that belong to you, or only when witnesses are present?" Auren moved closer, his shadow falling across her veiled figure. "You have a sharp tongue for a woman in your position, Lady Wynther. And you have a reputation for cold pragmatism, Your Grace. Yet here you are, defending the honor of a bride you've never seen. How curious. Perhaps, he said slowly, I simply believe in basic decency. Or perhaps, she countered, rising to her feet with fluid grace, you're trying to convince yourself this marriage is more than a transaction. She was tall, taller than he'd expected, and standing this close, he could almost feel the heat of her through the heavy veil. She smelled of winter roses and something darker. Smoke, maybe, or secrets. I should retire, she said. The hour grows late. Auren stepped back, allowing her passage. Of course. She moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you, Your Grace. For tonight, it was nothing. Perhaps. The veil shifted as she turned her head. Or perhaps you're more than they say you are. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of roses and the echo of her footsteps. Hours later, unable to sleep, Auren walked the darkened corridors of Greythorn Manor. He told himself he was merely restless, that the upcoming wedding had him on edge, but his feet carried him toward the east wing, where his bride's chambers had been prepared. He shouldn't be here. It was improper, intrusive. He stopped outside her door anyway, and heard her voice, low and fervent, carrying through the wood. At first, he thought she was praying, but the words, "Let them pay for what they did," she murmured, her voice raw with fury. "Let them answer for every life they stole, every lie they told. I'll make them see. I'll make them all see." Auren's blood went cold. This wasn't prayer. This was a vow, a promise of vengeance. He stepped back from the door, his mind racing. She wasn't here for alliance. She wasn't here for protection. She was here for something else entirely. Something dangerous. "Who are you really, Lady Wynther?" he whispered to the darkness. But the shadows kept her secrets, and the only answer was silence. Chapter 4. His fingers found the edge of the veil. The cathedral seemed to shrink around him, the hundreds of nobles fading into shadow, the candlelight dimming until there was only this moment. Duke Auren Leclair and the veiled woman before him, her hand resting in his, her breath barely audible beneath the layers of lace. The priest's voice echoed through the vaulted hall, ancient words in the old tongue, binding them before God and empire. Auren barely heard them. His mind was still in that darkened corridor 2 nights ago, hearing her voice through the door. Let them pay for what they did. Who was she? What did she want? And why did part of him not care? "Your Grace," the priest prompted gently. The unveiling, the crowd leaned forward as one, a living thing hungry for spectacle. In the front pews, he caught fragments of whispered wagers. 10 gold sovereigns says he faints. 20 says she screams. I heard she wept for 3 days before agreeing to this. Auren's jaw tightened. Let them whisper. Let them wager. In moments, it would all be over, and he would face whatever truth lay beneath that veil, with the same stoic resolve he'd faced every other trial in his life. He lifted his hands to the veil's edge. Isolde's fingers trembled just slightly, where they still rested in his. The first sign of vulnerability he'd seen from her. "Are you ready, my lady?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Beneath the veil, her voice came soft but steady. "The question, Your Grace, is whether you are ready." Before he could respond, she gave the barest nod. Time slowed to honey. Duke Auren lifted the veil, layer by delicate layer, the gossamer silk whispering as it fell away. First the outermost layer still too thick to see through, then the second, the third. Candlelight caught in the fabric, turning it gold, then amber, then translucent. And then the veil fell. The cathedral erupted. Gasps, shouts. A woman's fan clattered to the stone floor. Someone swore. Lord Callum's hand flew to his chest as though struck, because standing before Duke Auren Leclair was not a monster, not a disfigured victim, not a cursed, broken thing. The woman revealed was breathtaking. High cheekbones, luminous skin unmarred by even a whisper of scarring. Dark hair swept back to reveal a face that could have been carved by the gods themselves, sharp and elegant, with eyes like winter steel that met his without flinching. She was beautiful in the way a sword is beautiful, in the way a storm is beautiful, dangerous, devastating. undeniable. But it wasn't her beauty that made Auren's world tilt. It was recognition. His breath caught. His grip on her hand tightened involuntarily. No, it couldn't be. But it was. 7 years ago, the tail end of the Civil War. He'd been leading a scouting party through the Wynther borderlands when they'd been ambushed. Arrow through his shoulder, sword wound across his ribs, bleeding out in the mud while his men fought off the enemy. He'd crawled to the edge of a stream, certain he would die there. And then she had appeared. A young woman, barely 20, with dark hair and steady hands. She'd pulled him from the water, bound his wounds with strips of her own cloak, given him water from her flask. He'd been delirious with pain and blood loss, but he remembered her voice, calm, commanding, telling him to breathe, stay awake, stay with me. She'd saved his life. And then, before he could thank her, before he could even ask her name, she'd vanished into the forest like smoke. He'd searched for her afterward, sent men to comb the borderlands, but no one matching her description existed in any of the local villages. Eventually, he'd convinced himself she'd been a fever dream, a phantom conjured by blood loss and desperation. But she was real, and she was standing in front of him, wearing the Wynther name like a weapon. You, he breathed, too quietly for the court to hear. It was you. Her expression remained perfectly composed, but in her eyes, those cold, intelligent eyes, he saw something flicker. Not surprise, not guilt, triumph. Hello, Your Grace, Isolde Wynther said softly, her lips curving into the barest shadow of a smile. Did you miss me? The cathedral had dissolved into chaos. Nobles shouted over one another, demanding to know what trickery this was, what deception. The supposed ugly bride was the most beautiful woman many of them had ever seen. The whispers turned to accusations, then to wild speculation. But Auren heard none of it. He stared at the woman before him, the woman who had saved his life, the woman who had been presumed dead in the Wynther massacre, the woman who had somehow returned from the grave, wearing vengeance like a wedding gown, and understood with terrible clarity. She hadn't married him for peace. She'd married him for revenge. The Duke realized too late that his bride was not the monster of rumor, but the ghost of a sin his house had buried. Chapter 5. The private chambers behind the altar had never felt so small. Duke Auren had practically dragged Isolde through the side door as the cathedral descended into chaos, Lord Callum barking orders to clear the hall. Now they stood alone in the candlelit room where priests prepared for ceremony, the sounds of the uproar muffled by thick stone walls. Auren released her arm and stepped back, his chest heaving. Explain. Now. Isolde's expression remained maddeningly calm. She reached up with steady hands and removed what remained of the veil, letting the lace pool at her feet like a discarded skin. Without it, she looked even more striking and even more dangerous. What would you like me to explain, Your Grace? Her voice was silk over steel. That the rumors of my disfigurement were lies? That should be fairly obvious by now. Don't. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something raw and furious. Don't play games with me. I know who you are. I saw you 7 years ago in the borderlands. You saved my life. Did I? She tilted her head, studying him like a predator studying prey. How convenient that you remember that now. Tell me, did you remember it when your father's men burned Wynther Hall to the ground? When they murdered my father in his own study? When they tried to kill me? The words hit him like physical blows. What are you talking about? You really don't know. It wasn't a question. Isolde laughed, but the sound held no humor. Of course you don't. The great Duke Leclair, so honorable, so noble, completely ignorant of the blood his father spilled to build his legacy. She reached into the hidden pocket of her wedding gown and pulled out a silver pendant, a signet seal bearing the Leclair crest, the metal tarnished and dented. Do you recognize this? She held it up to the candlelight. I took it from the neck of one of the men who killed my father. He wore it proudly as he set fire to everything I loved. Auren stared at the pendant, his mind racing. His father had died 5 years ago, taking whatever secrets he'd kept to the grave. But Auren had inherited more than just the dukedom. He'd inherited ledgers, correspondence, sealed documents he'd never fully examined. Documents, he was suddenly sickeningly certain, would confirm her story. "The Wynther massacre," he said slowly. "They said it was rebels, enemies of the crown. Lies." Isolde's voice cracked, just slightly, the first real emotion breaking through her armor. "Your father wanted our lands, our trade routes, our influence. So he manufactured a conspiracy, claimed my father was funding insurgents, and sent men to erase us." Her hand closed around the pendant, knuckles white. "I was 17. I watched them murder him. I barely escaped with my life." Auren felt the ground shifting beneath him, everything he thought he knew about his family's honor crumbling like rotten wood. "If this is true." "If?" She laughed again, harsh and bitter. "You think I would orchestrate this entire charade on a lie? I spent 7 years in exile, Your Grace. 7 years living under false names, hiding my face, waiting for the moment I could reclaim what was stolen from me. So you married me for revenge." The words tasted like ash. "I married you," Isolde said, her eyes blazing in the candlelight. "To take back my family's name, to expose the truth about what House Leclair did, to make sure my father's murder didn't die in silence." "And what then?" Auren demanded, moving closer until barely a foot separated them. "After you destroy me? After you ruin everything my house stands for? What happens to you, Isolde?" The use of her given name made her flinch barely perceptible, but he saw it. "I don't care what happens to me." "Liar." He caught her wrist, the pendant still clutched in her hand, pressing between them. "If you didn't care, you wouldn't be shaking." And she was. Beneath all that icy composure, her hand trembled in his grip. "I hate you," she whispered, but her voice wavered. "I hate everything you represent, everything your name stands for." "I know." He should release her, should step away. But he didn't. "But you saved my life once." "Why?" "Because I didn't know who you were yet." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw not just rage, but something deeper, something that looked terrifyingly like loneliness. "Because for one moment you were just a dying man who needed help, not the son of my father's murderer." The air between them felt charged, dangerous, anger and attraction blurring into something neither of them could name. "If this is vengeance, my lady," Auren whispered, his thumb brushing against her racing pulse, "you chose a dangerous battlefield." "So did you," Isolde breathed, "when you married a ghost." Chapter 6. By midnight, Duke Auren had made his decision. He sat alone in his study, the marriage contract spread before him on the desk, a quill poised in his hand, one signature, one legal maneuver. He could annul the marriage quietly, citing unconsummated vows or fraud or any number of technicalities the church would accept. Isolde would be free to reclaim her title without the burden of being bound to his cursed house. It was the only way to protect her. Because if what she'd told him was true, and every instinct screamed that it was, then his family's enemies would become her enemies. His father's sins would paint a target on her back, and Auren would rather destroy his own marriage than see her blood spilled for his legacy. He signed the document with swift, decisive strokes. What he didn't know was that in the east wing of Greythorn Manor, his cousin, Lord Auren Leclair, stood reading a stolen letter by candlelight, his handsome face twisted with fury. "The Wynther girl lives," Varian murmured to the man beside him, a scarred mercenary who'd served him for years. "After all this time, she survives, and now she's married to the Duke himself." "What would you have us do, my lord?" Varian's smile was cold as winter frost. "The same thing we should have done 7 years ago. Finish what we started." Auren found Isolde in the moonlit corridor outside her chambers, still wearing her wedding gown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her expression guarded. "Come to cast me out, Your Grace." "To free you." He held up the annulment papers. "I've signed them. By morning, this marriage will be dissolved. You'll have your title, your lands, your name, everything that's rightfully yours, and you won't be bound to a house built on your father's blood." He expected relief, perhaps even gratitude. Instead, her eyes flashed with fury. "You coward!" She stalked toward him, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just sign away your guilt? Erase your family's crimes with a piece of paper? I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection." Her voice rose, echoing off the stone walls. "I need justice. I need the truth exposed. And you want to hide me away like another shameful secret. That's not." Auren grabbed her arm as she tried to push past him. "Damn it, Isolde, listen to me. If you stay married to me, you become a target. Every enemy I have, every rival who wants to see House Leclair fall, they'll come for you. Let them come." She wrenched free, her eyes blazing. "I've been hunted before. I survived." "Barely." The word tore from him, raw and desperate. "You survived barely, and you've been hiding ever since. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder? Better than spending it bound to the son of my father's murderer." The words hung between them like a blade. "I know," Auren said quietly, the fight draining from him. "I know what my father did, and I know I can never make it right. But I can at least make sure you're safe." Something in Isolde's expression softened just a fraction. "You really mean that?" Every word. She opened her mouth to respond, and the shadows moved. 3 figures detached from the darkness of the corridor, black-clad and silent as death. Moonlight glinted off drawn blades. Auren had a heartbeat to react. He shoved Isolde behind him just as the first assassin lunged. Steel flashed. Auren caught the blade on his forearm, pain exploding through him. But he didn't let go. He drove his fist into the man's throat, sending him staggering back. The second assassin came from the side, knife aimed at Isolde's heart. Auren threw himself between them. The blade meant for her plunged into his shoulder instead, punching through muscle and scraping bone. He gasped, blood blooming hot across his wedding coat, but his hand found the assassin's wrist and twisted. Bone cracked. The man screamed. Behind them, Isolde had seized a candlestick from the wall and brought it crashing down on the third assassin's skull. Guards' shouts echoed from distant corridors, but too far, too late. The lead assassin, the one Auren had struck, staggered to his feet, coughing blood, and laughed. "Lord Varian sends his regards," the man rasped. "He says, the Wynther bitch should have stayed dead the first time." Ice flooded Auren's veins. Varian? But the assassin's eyes had already gone glassy. Dead. Auren collapsed against the wall, blood pouring between his fingers where he clutched his shoulder. Isolde caught him, her hands frantically pressing against the wound. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice breaking. "Auren, stay with me." His vision swam, but he found her eyes, those fierce, beautiful eyes that had haunted him for 7 years. "I wed a rumor," he whispered, blood on his lips, "and found my salvation." Then darkness claimed him. Chapter 7. Dawn broke over Greythorn Manor as Lord Auren Leclair was dragged into the great hall in chains. The guards had found him attempting to flee through the servants' passages, his saddlebag stuffed with gold and incriminating documents, ledgers detailing payments to mercenaries, correspondence with his co-conspirators, and most damningly, the original order signed by the late Duke, commanding the destruction of House Wynther. Varian had orchestrated it all. The massacre, the cover-up, the lies that had let him profit from stolen lands while a 17-year-old girl fled for her life. "It should have been mine," Varian snarled as Lord Callum read the charges before the assembled court. "The dukedom, the power, all of it. But the old duke chose his son over me. So I gave him a war to fight, enemies to chase. And while Auren played hero, I built my fortune on Wynther ash." The court erupted in outrage. But Isolde, standing tall in the gallery, no veil to hide behind, felt nothing but cold satisfaction as they led him away. "Justice, at last. By order of the crown," Lord Callum announced, his voice ringing through the hall. "Lady Isolde Wynther is hereby recognized as the rightful Marchioness of Wynther, heir to all lands, titles, and honors stolen from her house. Let no man dispute her claim." The nobles bowed, some in respect, others in fear. Isolde acknowledged none of them. She turned and walked from the hall, her footsteps echoing on marble, her mind on only one thing: him. Duke Auren lay in his chambers, pale as the sheets beneath him, bandages wrapped tight around his shoulder and torso. The physician had said he would live, but it had been close, too close. Isolde sat beside his bed, just as she had for 3 days now, tending his wounds with the same steady hands that had saved him 7 years ago. She changed his dressings, checked for fever, forced bitter medicine between his lips when he was too weak to protest. A strange mirror of their first meeting. Then, he'd been a nameless dying soldier. Now, he was her husband, bound by vows neither of them had wanted, saved by a woman who had every reason to let him bleed. On the 4th morning, his eyes opened. Isolde, her name on his lips, hoarse but conscious. "Don't try to sit up," she said, pressing a hand to his chest. "You'll tear the stitches." He obeyed, studying her face in the gray dawn light. "Varian?" "Arrested. Confessed everything." Her voice was steady, clinical. "The court has recognized my title. It's over. And yet you're still here." She looked away, her hands fidgeting with the blood-stained bandages in her lap. "Someone had to keep you alive. You have an annoying habit of throwing yourself in front of blades." "Isolde." He caught her wrist, his grip weak but insistent. "Look at me." She did, and he saw it. The walls crumbling, the armor cracking, tears she'd refused to shed for 7 years finally gathering in her eyes. "I came here for vengeance," she whispered. "I wanted to destroy you, ruin everything your family built. And then you." Her voice broke. "You almost died saving me. Why would you do that?" "Because," Auren said simply, "I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment you pulled me from that stream, though I was too much of a fool to realize it, until I lifted your veil and saw the truth." "The truth," she repeated bitterly. "That your father murdered mine? That our houses are bound by blood and betrayal?" "The truth," he corrected gently. "That beneath all the lies and masks and vengeance, we're just 2 people who saved each other's lives, who chose each other, even when we didn't have to." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't want revenge anymore. I'm just tired, Auren. So tired of carrying this alone." "Then don't." He lifted his good hand to her face, brushing the tear away. "Let me carry it with you. Let me spend the rest of my life making amends for my father's sins. Let me earn your forgiveness, your trust." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Your heart." Isolde closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. When she opened them again, something had shifted, the fury tempered into something softer, something like hope. "You've been wearing a mask too," she murmured. "The cold Duke, the dutiful son, the man who cares for nothing but honor." She placed her hand over his heart. "Let me see the real you. No more masks, no more veils." "No more veils," he agreed. And in the quiet of that dawn-lit room, Isolde Wynther leaned down and kissed her husband, not in vengeance, not in duty, but in forgiveness. 2 weeks later, they walked together through the gardens of Greythorn Manor as the sun rose golden over the eastern hills. Isolde's veil, that heavy shroud that had hidden her face and armored her heart, lay forgotten in her chambers, gathering dust. She no longer needed it. She no longer needed to hide. "Do you regret it?" Auren asked, their hands intertwined. "Everything that led us here?" Isolde considered. The pain, the loss, the years of exile and fury. And then she looked at the man beside her, scarred, imperfect, but hers, and shook her head. "No," she said, "because it led to this, to truth." He had believed he was wedding an ugly damsel, but when he lifted her veil, he found the only beauty that ever mattered: truth. Behind them, caught in a morning breeze, a piece of forgotten lace drifted from an open window. The veil tumbled through the air, lighter than breath, and disappeared into the wind like a ghost finally laid to rest. They walked into the dawn together, and neither looked back. Dear friends, every veil we wear, be it of pride, pain, or vengeance, only hides the truth that could set us free. The Duke and Lady Isolde learned that love cannot bloom behind deception, and that forgiveness often takes more courage than revenge ever could. When we dare to face our truths, even the darkest past can give way to light. If their journey moved you, subscribe to follow more stories where love conquers shadow and truth restores the heart. And share in the comments below. Dear friends, where in the world are you reading from? Thanks for watching.